So I pulled out randomly in my container what I'm going to draw next. The first one came out as Street Fighter 6 Cammy, and the second one came out as 300, which is the 300 style. I'm gonna try to do an impersonation. This is Sparta! So I'm gonna make Cammy in Street Fighter 6 with the style of 300. And I'm also gonna give a scale on 1 to 10 on difficulty, 1 being really easy and 10 being extremely difficult. Stay tuned to the end to find out. Let's dive into it. So when it came down to drawing Cammy in Street Fighter 6, here's the references that I used as far as drawing Cammy. Now, of course, sex sells, and let's face it, the way Cammy looks in Street Fighter 6 is pretty obvious. So I doubled down upon that. Sorry, EXG, I got to do it. Considering the fact that this is going to be in 300 style, yeah, I mean, if you see the way they looked, so we're making her into a female Spartan. The hardest part when it came down to drawing this was at the beginning phase, I was like struggling with how I'm going to set up the composition. I kept on messing up a few times. And then the moment I started working on her face and the delts and just getting the right gesture, that's when things started to come into play. The difficult part upon drawing Cammy was, of course, the body, because Cammy's body, as you guys could see, the difficult part in terms of drawing Cammy was her body, because she is fit and at the same time she is voluptuous. And the reason why that was difficult was because of the simple fact that her body is contoured. The reason why it was difficult because her body is contoured, as in like I made sure that she's in motion. So by making a body contour, you also gotta align the abs and then her gluteus maximus and her thighs. She's thick and at the same time thin, as they call it now, the slim thick proportions. Considering the fact that Street Fighter always exaggerates when it comes down to females' bodies, I did the same thing. Wanted to give it more of a whimsical approach where everything is in motion, and I wanted to emphasize also on the shield because I was looking at the reference of 300. Another thing too that I had to fix was the head. So once I got the gesture right, I realized when I was focusing on the face, I realized pulling back that the head was too big. So I had to use the pale elastic tool to strengthen the head so it could be a bit more in proportion. Don't want to make her look like she has a bobblehead. Another thing too was just to add the motion feel, so having the lines move in motion. So I added that there so it could look more exaggerated. I wanted to make sure that I captured her face, but at the same time, I wasn't trying to make a replica one-on-one of how she looks in the actual game. I wanted to give my interpretation of how Cammy looks. I didn't want to make a replica like one-on-one of how she looks in the actual video game, so I wanted to do my interpretation. Just like the fan art that you guys saw before, they did their own interpretation of how Cammy looks in their own style. Now, of course, with the 300, they are men, so they don't have a bra, right? They're men, and they have the six-packs and all that. So I gave her the six-pack, right? But, of course, she can't just walk around with no bra. I mean, I'll be demonetized on YouTube if I do that. Or, what am I saying demonetized? I'm not even monetized at the time of this recording.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Can't forget about Cammy's gauntlet. So I wanted to keep some of the elements of Cammy, her trademark gauntlets. Honestly, the sketch took a couple of days. It took like about 2 days. So this is like one of the longest sketches that I had to work on because I wanted to make sure everything was right before I transfer the files onto Adobe Illustrator. And this is when I started utilizing the pen tool. Now the smart thing when it comes down to utilizing the pen tool is to make sure even before you set up Adobe Illustrator, just make sure everything is easily identified, because if you have something that looks ambiguous or it looks uncertain or it looks like you didn't make a full concrete decision, then it's going to suffer when it comes onto the pen tool, because then you're going to be confused with like, am I tracing over this part of the sketch or am I not? So that's the main reason why it took me hours to make sure the sketch was a-okay before moving forward. Also, her hair took some time just because her hair is like it's a unique hairstyle, of course, you know, especially with the Street Fighter 6 look. I actually prefer this hairstyle than her original hairstyle, where it's like extremely long pigtails, right? Or ponytails going downwards. I actually prefer this one. So the pen tool, again, didn't take too long. I would say the pen tool took about, I'll say like 3 to 4 hours, roughly. Just because of the other elements like the spear, the shield, her cape, because that's the thing about 300. They are pretty much like ancient superheroes, the way Zack Snyder depicted them in the movie. So I really wanted to emphasize on that cape as if she's like Superman or Batman. Speaking of emphasize, yes, I did make her chesticles big.
Nice.
Even though Cammy in Street Fighter 6 do not have big chesticles, she has a big, looking like she's a bit of a fitness influencer / IG model. And I say this all the time when it comes down to the pen tool. It's not always making something accurate on your first time using it. It's making it into a shape and then going back with the directional selection to fix the anchor points. Once the pen tool was complete, this is when I added the colors. Now the colors, I was looking at the references again, and at first I was debating on whether or not I was gonna give her like black eyebrows, but the consistency throughout all the references is that her eyebrows are brunette blonde, so it's not black, so I want to stay consistent with that. I made her lips voluptuous because that's how she looks in Street Fighter 6, so I want to keep that same type of style, as well as the scar on her, I guess her left cheek, which is our right viewpoint of how she looks here. I kept the colors really simplistic, looking at the reference of 300, how their colors are maroon / burgundy, so it's like a dark red, and also the color palette is very earth tone. So the shield, I wanted to make that brown. I shined up the spear, and I also shined up her eyes. When it came down to the shield, again, I used a UK flag right there with the mixture of the ancient, old school type of shield. So it's like a hybrid between the two to represent Cammy in the 300 style. Pendant as well, I copied that same pendant that you see in the 300 movie that she also have as her version as well with the cape. I call it a cape. I know it's not a cape, but I call it a cape. When it came out to the 6-pack, yeah, I didn't want to make the 6-pack too deep. I know the 300 is more exaggerated, but in my opinion, when women, this is just my interpretation. This is my preference, honestly, when it comes down to women. Like, I'm not a big fan of them having rock hard 6-pack. So instead of me making it like with the darker shade, I just made it a little bit more transparent with a lighter color that's more reflected upon her skin as opposed to a darker contrast. And then afterwards, once the coloring was complete, this is where I transferred the files from Adobe Illustrator to Adobe Premiere. And Adobe Premiere took me a little bit longer than usual just because I had to play around with the color grading. And you already know with the 300 movie, everything is like really dramatic, monochromatic color grading. So it took me some time to captivate that onto this illustration. And of course, like all my illustrations, I always play around the depth of field. So making it look more like a movie by having a background blurred, so that way she can pop out more. So here's the sketch of Cammy in 300 style. So now I'm gonna give you guys a rating on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being really easy, 10 being really difficult. Cammy in 300 style is a 8 out of 10. Mainly because it just took some time with the anatomy just to get it right, and also the proportions of her body being voluptuous but at the same time looking fit, and to capture the likeness of her face, and just the overall gesture of this took me a while. This is one of the longest sketches I've done on Adobe Photoshop, longer than most of the stuff I've done recently. So that's why I gave it an 8 out of 10. Make sure you guys also like, share, and subscribe. This takes a long time to make, not just making the illustration, but also doing the editing process. And like always, I just put a little quick stop animation in the end of every video. So take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.